You've been playing the game all wrong, haven't you? All this time, you've believed that winning means crushing others, that success requires making enemies, that power comes from being the loudest voice in the room. But here's what Machiavelli understood that most people miss entirely. The greatest victories are won in silence, and the most effective power is the kind that others never see coming. You see, there's a quiet strategy that allows you to achieve everything you want, while leaving others feeling like they chose to help you, like they wanted to give you what you needed, like supporting your success was their own brilliant idea. Think about the last time you tried to force something to happen. Remember how much resistance you encountered, how exhausting it became, how many relationships were damaged in the process. That's because you were operating from what Jung would call the shadow of ambition, the dark side of desire that believes conquest requires conflict. But Machiavelli knew something deeper, something that connects to the very essence of human psychology. People will move mountains for you if they believe it serves their own interests, if they feel respected and valued in the process, if they never feel manipulated or coerced. The quiet strategy begins with a fundamental shift in your understanding of influence. Most people think influence is about changing others, about bending them to your will, about making them do what you want them to do. But that's the amateur's approach, the strategy of those who lack true psychological sophistication. Real influence is about aligning your goals with what others already want, about becoming the vehicle through which they achieve their own desires, about positioning yourself as the solution to problems they didn't even know they had. You've probably encountered those people who seem to effortlessly get what they want. They never seem to struggle, never seem to fight, never seem to make enemies, yet somehow they're always winning, always advancing, always achieving their objectives. You might have wondered what their secret is, might have assumed they're just lucky or naturally gifted, but luck has nothing to do with it, and neither does some mysterious natural talent. What they understand is the psychology of influence, the art of winning through alignment rather than opposition. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but he also understood something more nuanced that most people ignore. It is better still to be neither feared nor loved, but to be useful, to be valuable, to be the person others cannot imagine being without. When you become indispensable, you don't need to demand respect because it flows to you naturally. When you become the solution to other people's problems, you don't need to fight for opportunities because they seek you out. When you master the quiet strategy, you stop needing to make enemies because everyone becomes, in some sense, your ally. But here's where it gets psychologically complex, where Jung's insights become crucial to understanding why this strategy works so effectively. Every person you encounter is carrying their own unconscious projections, their own unresolved needs, their own secret desires for recognition, security, advancement, or validation. The quiet strategist learns to read these unconscious patterns, to understand what people really want beneath what they say they want, to see the hidden motivations that drive their decisions. You see, when someone resists your direct approach, they're not really resisting you. They're resisting the feeling of being controlled, the sense that their autonomy is being threatened, the unconscious fear that agreeing with you means losing something of themselves. But when you approach them indirectly, when you present your goals as serving their interests, when you make them feel like partners rather than targets, that resistance dissolves because their ego is no longer under attack. The quiet strategy involves what Machiavelli called the lion and the fox. Most people understand the lion part, the direct approach, the show of strength, the frontal assault. But they completely miss the fox, the subtle approach, the indirect method, the psychological finesse that achieves the same result without triggering defensive reactions. The fox understands that every person has a psychological profile, a set of triggers and motivations that can be learned and leveraged not for manipulation, but for mutual benefit. Think about how you've been approaching your goals recently. Have you been the lion, charging forward with obvious intentions, making your desires known to everyone, essentially putting targets on your back? Or have you been learning to be the fox, studying the psychological landscape, understanding what others want, finding ways to align your success with their success? The difference between these approaches isn't just tactical, it's the difference between exhausting yourself through constant conflict and achieving your goals through elegant efficiency. Here's what the quiet strategy looks like in practice. Instead of demanding a promotion, you become invaluable to your supervisor's success. Instead of arguing for your position, you ask questions that lead others to your conclusion. Instead of trying to convince someone to help you, you discover how helping you serves their interests. Instead of making yourself the obvious winner, you create situations where everyone feels like they're winning, where your success is inseparable from their success. But this isn't about manipulation, and this is where most people misunderstand both Machiavelli and the psychology of influence. Manipulation involves deception, hidden agendas, and win-lose scenarios. The quiet strategy is about transparency within subtlety, about genuine mutual benefit, about creating win-win situations that are so elegant that others don't even recognize the strategy involved. You're not tricking anyone. You're simply presenting your value in a way that makes sense to their psychology, their needs, their worldview. Jung understood that we all have blind spots, aspects of ourselves that we cannot see directly, but that influence every interaction we have. These blind spots create opportunities for those who understand psychological dynamics. When you learn to see what others cannot see about themselves, when you understand their unconscious motivations and unspoken needs, you can position yourself in ways that feel natural and beneficial to them while also serving your own objectives. The quiet strategist becomes a student of human nature, not to exploit others, but to understand how to create value that others can recognize and appreciate. You learn to speak the language that others understand, to present your ideas in ways that resonate with their values, to frame your requests in terms of their benefits. This isn't deception. It's communication that actually works. Influence that creates genuine connection rather than resistance. Most people fail in their attempts at influence because they focus entirely on what they want, rather than understanding what others want. They present their requests in their own language, using their own values, addressing their own concerns. But influence doesn't work that way. Influence requires translation, the ability to take your desires and express them in terms that make sense to others, that align with their priorities, that serve their interests. You've probably noticed that certain people in your life seem to get their way more often than others, not through force or manipulation, but through some kind of natural magnetism or appeal. What you're observing is the quiet strategy in action. These people have learned, perhaps unconsciously, to present themselves and their ideas in ways that others find attractive, valuable, or beneficial. They've learned to be the solution rather than the problem, the opportunity rather than the obstacle. Machiavelli understood that sustainable power comes not from domination, but from being useful, from becoming someone that others need and want to support. When you force people to do things, you create resentment. When you manipulate people, you create suspicion. But when you align your success with their success, when you become genuinely valuable to their objectives, you create loyalty and partnership that serves everyone involved. The psychology behind this is profound. Every person is fundamentally motivated by their own interests, their own needs, their own desires for security, recognition, advancement, or fulfillment. This isn't selfish, it's human nature. The quiet strategist doesn't fight against this reality, but works with it, finding ways to serve others' interests while also achieving their own goals. This creates what psychologists call a positive feedback loop, where everyone benefits and everyone wants to continue the relationship. But here's the sophisticated part that most people miss. The quiet strategy requires genuine value creation. You cannot fake being useful. You cannot pretend to serve others' interests while secretly only serving your own. People have evolved sophisticated unconscious detection systems for authenticity and deception. The quiet strategy only works when you actually become valuable, when you actually create benefit for others, when your success genuinely contributes to their success. This means developing real skills, real knowledge, real abilities that others need and appreciate. It means understanding markets, industries, organizations, and relationships well enough to identify opportunities for mutual benefit. It means becoming someone who solves problems rather than creates them, someone who opens doors rather than closes them, someone who makes things easier rather than more difficult. The quiet strategist learns to think in terms of systems rather than individual transactions. Instead of asking, how can I get what I want from this person? You ask, how can I create value in this system that naturally results in me getting what I want? Instead of focusing on individual battles, you focus on positioning yourself advantageously within the larger game. Instead of trying to win against others, you try to win with others. Jung wrote about the process of individuating, of becoming who you truly are, beneath all the masks and personas you've adopted to fit in or get ahead. The quiet strategy is actually a form of individuation because it requires you to understand your authentic value, your real strengths, your genuine contribution to others' lives and goals. You cannot successfully employ the quiet strategy while hiding behind false personas or pretending to be someone you're not. This is why the quiet strategy is ultimately more fulfilling than more aggressive approaches to getting what you want. When you win through force or manipulation, you know that your success is built on others' unwillingness or deception. But when you win through the quiet strategy, you know that others genuinely wanted to help you, that your success created value for them as well, that your relationships were strengthened rather than damaged in the process. Machiavelli also understood that reputation is more valuable than almost any other asset. The quiet strategist builds a reputation for being valuable, trustworthy, and mutually beneficial to work with. This reputation becomes a compound asset that makes every future interaction easier, every future request more likely to be granted, every future opportunity more accessible. People begin to seek you out rather than you having to chase opportunities. The shadow side that Jung would recognize in most approaches to success is the belief that winning requires others to lose, that your gain must come at someone else's expense. This scarcity thinking creates unnecessary conflict and resistance. The quiet strategy operates from abundance thinking, the understanding that value can be created, that situations can be improved for everyone involved, that your success can actually enhance rather than diminish others' opportunities. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the quiet strategy is how it transforms your own psychology. When you stop fighting against others and start aligning with them, when you stop trying to take value and start creating value, you begin to feel different about yourself and your place in the world. You stop feeling like you're in constant battle and start feeling like you're in constant collaboration. You stop seeing others as obstacles and start seeing them as potential partners. This psychological shift changes everything about how you show up in the world. Instead of defensive and aggressive energy that others unconsciously resist, you project collaborative and valuable energy that others unconsciously appreciate. Instead of triggering others' shadow projections about being controlled or used, you activate their positive projections about partnership and mutual benefit. The quiet strategy isn't about becoming passive or avoiding conflict entirely. Sometimes direct action is necessary. Sometimes you need to be the lion rather than the fox. But the quiet strategist chooses their battles carefully, understanding that most objectives can be achieved through alignment and collaboration rather than opposition and force. They save their direct confrontations for situations where indirect approaches won't work, making those confrontations more effective because they're rare and deliberate rather than constant and reactive. You see, Machiavelli's real insight wasn't about being ruthless or manipulative. His real insight was about being effective, about understanding human psychology well enough to achieve your objectives with minimum resistance and maximum sustainability. The quiet strategy embodies this insight, allowing you to win without making enemies because you're not taking anything from anyone. Instead, you're creating value, solving problems, and making everyone better off. This is the path to sustainable success, to relationships that enhance rather than drain you, to achievements that you can feel genuinely proud of because they were built on value creation rather than value extraction. The quiet strategy to win without making enemies isn't just a tactic. It's a way of being in the world that transforms both your results and your relationships, both your external success and your internal experience of that success. And here's where the deeper psychological transformation begins to reveal itself. When you consistently practice the quiet strategy, you start to notice something profound happening within your own psyche. The part of you that used to feel like you were constantly swimming against the current, constantly fighting uphill battles, constantly exhausted from interpersonal conflict, begins to relax. There's a settling that happens, a kind of psychological exhale that comes from no longer being at war with the world around you. Jung would recognize this as the integration of your shadow, the acceptance and transformation of those parts of yourself that were previously driving you toward destructive patterns of competition and conflict. Most people's approach to success is contaminated by unresolved psychological material, by childhood wounds around not being seen or valued, by unconscious fears of scarcity that make them grab at opportunities rather than create them, by projections that turn every interaction into a battle for dominance or survival. The The quiet strategy forces you to confront and heal these shadow patterns because it simply won't work if you're operating from wounded psychology. You cannot genuinely create value for others while you're secretly resenting them. You cannot build authentic partnerships while you're unconsciously trying to dominate or control. You cannot present yourself as useful and beneficial while you're internally driven by desperation or manipulation. The strategy itself becomes a form of psychological purification. Consider how different your energy feels when you walk into a room knowing that you have something valuable to offer versus when you walk in feeling like you need to take something or prove something. The first creates what psychologists call approach motivation in others. They're drawn to you because being around you feels beneficial. The second creates avoidance motivation. People unconsciously sense your neediness or aggression and want to get away from the interaction. Most people are completely unconscious of the energy they're projecting, completely unaware of how their internal psychological state affects every interaction they have. They wonder why they keep encountering resistance, why their relationships feel so difficult, why their professional interactions are so exhausting. But they're broadcasting psychological signals that trigger defensive responses in others, unconscious communications that say, "I'm here to take something from you," rather than, "I'm here to create something with you." The quiet strategist learns to master their internal state first, to approach interactions from genuine curiosity about how they can serve, rather than from anxiety about what they can get. This isn't about suppressing your desires or pretending you don't want things. It's about understanding that the most effective way to get what you want is to become genuinely valuable to others in the process of pursuing it. Machiavelli understood that sustainable power requires what he called the consent of the governed. Even in authoritarian systems, leaders need at least passive acceptance from those they lead. But the quiet strategist goes beyond mere acceptance to active enthusiasm, to situations where others genuinely want to help you succeed because your success serves their interests too. This creates what systems theorists call positive feedback loops, where success breeds more success because each victory makes future victories easier to achieve. Think about the compound effect of this approach over time. Every successful interaction using the quiet strategy doesn't just achieve your immediate objective. It also builds your reputation, strengthens your relationships, increases others' trust in you, and makes them more likely to think of you when future opportunities arise. You're not just winning individual battles. You're building an entire ecosystem of support that makes winning become increasingly natural and effortless. But here's the psychological sophistication that most people miss. The quiet strategy requires you to develop genuine empathy, real understanding of others' perspectives, authentic appreciation for their needs and challenges. This isn't empathy as manipulation, using understanding of others to exploit them. This is empathy as evolution, expanding your consciousness to include others' well-being as part of your own success equation. Jung wrote about the process of expanding consciousness, of moving from the narrow ego-driven perspective to a more inclusive understanding of yourself in relationship to others and to the larger systems you're part of. The quiet strategy is actually a practice in consciousness expansion because it requires you to think beyond your immediate desires to consider the broader ecosystem of relationships and interests that surround any situation. When you operate from this expanded perspective, you start to see opportunities that others miss entirely. While they're focused on their narrow self-interest, fighting over pieces of a fixed pie, you're seeing ways to make the entire pie bigger, ways to create value that serves everyone involved. This isn't just a more ethical approach, it's a more intelligent approach, because it accesses creative solutions that competitive thinking cannot reach. The psychological transformation that comes from consistently practicing the quiet strategy is profound. You begin to feel truly powerful, not in the sense of power over others, but in the sense of power to create, to influence, to generate outcomes that you want while making others feel good about participating in those outcomes. This is what authentic confidence feels like. The deep knowing that you can handle whatever situation arises because you have the skills to find mutually beneficial solutions. Most people confuse confidence with aggression, power with domination, success with competition. But these are actually signs of psychological immaturity, evidence that someone hasn't yet learned how to get their needs met in ways that also serve others. The quiet strategist develops what could be called mature power, influence that comes from genuine value creation rather than manipulation or force. You start to notice how differently people respond to you when you approach them from this mature power. Instead of defensive or suspicious, they become open and collaborative. Instead of trying to protect themselves from you, they start looking for ways to work with you. Instead of seeing you as a threat to their success, they begin to see you as a catalyst for their success. This shift in how others perceive and respond to you creates what psychologists call a positive spiral. The more successfully you use the quiet strategy, the more others want to help you, which makes it even easier to achieve your goals, which builds your confidence and skill in the approach, which makes it even more effective. You move from fighting against the current to being carried by it, from swimming upstream to floating downstream, while still reaching your desired destination. But perhaps the most profound psychological benefit of mastering the quiet strategy is how it changes your relationship to failure and setbacks. When you're operating from force or manipulation, every failure feels personal. Every setback confirms your fears about not being good enough or strong enough. But when you're operating from the quiet strategy, failures become information, feedback about how to adjust your approach, opportunities to better understand the psychological landscape you're navigating. Because you're not attacking or manipulating others, they don't become defensive when things don't work out. They're often willing to give you feedback, to help you understand what might work better, to give you another chance to create value for them. Your failures don't burn bridges. They provide intelligence that makes your next attempt more sophisticated and effective. Machiavelli wrote that, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." The quiet strategist understands this deeply and uses it not for deception but for elegant positioning. You appear to be exactly what you are, someone who creates value, but you do it in ways that feel natural and beneficial to others rather than obviously strategic or self-serving. This is the art of being authentic while also being strategic, of being genuine while also being effective. Most people think they have to choose between being real and being successful, between being good and being powerful. But the quiet strategy reveals this as a false choice. The most sustainable success comes from being authentically valuable, from genuinely serving others while also achieving your own objectives. The psychological maturity required for this approach is significant. It requires you to heal your own wounds around scarcity and competition, to develop genuine abundance thinking, to cultivate authentic interest in others' well-being. It requires emotional regulation, the ability to stay centered and creative even when others are reactive or difficult. It requires patience, the willingness to build relationships and reputation over time rather than trying to force immediate results. But the payoff for this psychological development is extraordinary. You become someone that others seek out, someone whose success feels inevitable because so many people are invested in helping you achieve it. You build a career and life that feels aligned with your values rather than at odds with them. You achieve your goals while also strengthening your relationships, while also contributing positively to the environments and communities you're part of. The quiet strategy to win without making enemies ultimately becomes a way of being that transforms not just your external results but your internal experience of life itself. You stop feeling like you're constantly fighting and start feeling like you're constantly creating. You stop feeling like success requires sacrifice and start feeling like success creates abundance for everyone involved. This is Machiavelli's deepest teaching, not about manipulation or ruthlessness, but about the sophisticated psychology of sustainable influence and authentic power.